Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Welcome to our Devar Torah today. Well, we've had a lot of double parshas recently, and we have another one today. Parsha Behar is the first, and as we just read in the scripture, it is about the Shemitah, the 7th year, sabbatical year, and then it goes on to tell us about the Yovel, the 50th year Jubilee. What it tells us is that there are 7 cycles of 7 years each, which total 49 years, with the Jubilee year, the Yovel being the 50th year. And as we read this, we find that Adonai is very specific in his directions, because his purpose was not only to give rest to the land by letting it lie fallow, but also to give relief to his people. And since he created the land, he knew its limitations, and he knew that its fertility would be seriously depleted unless it was allowed to lie fallow, that is, to rest. When I was growing up, South Georgia farmers knew something about this. They took their cue from the Bible. I think most all of them did. And they followed God's wisdom. They rotated their crops, and they let a different section of land lie fallow each year. And it worked for them. But that was just their desire to do it, because according to Torah, the Shemitah is not for South Georgia. These directions are only to be followed in Eretz Yisrael, that is, in the land of Israel. Adonai said, but in the 7th year there is to be a Shabbat rest for the land, a Shabbat to Adonai. You are not to sow your field or prune your vineyard. And so what we see is that the land requires a rest so that the nutrients in the soil can be replenished, and it will prevent it from becoming gradually less and less fertile and eventually unable to grow enough to support the owner of the land. Well, the question we always have, and it's already been answered for us here in the Torah, but how would the landowner and his family live for a year without growing their crops? For us, if we took a year off from our job, we would have to have some way to make up for what we were not getting paid for. Well, when Adonai spoke these requirements through Moses, we find that Israel had been in the wilderness for some time. The tabernacle had already been constructed at this time. But what we see is that Adonai's principle behind the Shemitah was not new. He had introduced it to the people. I know you remember this. He introduced it to the people even before they reached Mount Sinai. And he had showed them that he would provide enough in advance for the time when nothing is provided. And he demonstrated this principle by giving them manna, and then later on giving them quail. But they could only collect manna, as it says in the Hebrew, man, which basically says, what's this? They didn't understand what it was, but that's what they called it. What's this? But he demonstrated this by giving them an opportunity to collect it for 6 days of the week. And his principle was then, and still is, 6 days shall you labor. We all understand that. And then on the 6th day, they would be able to collect enough for the 7th day, the Shabbat, the day of rest. So he showed them that principle even before they got to Mount Sinai. Now later on, he is giving them another example of that principle, which is also true with regard to the seventh year, the Shemitah. Adonai said, "Now I will command my blessing to you in the sixth year, so that it will yield a harvest sufficient for 3 years." We have to have his help to be able to do this, but he provided enough in the sixth year, not only for that year, but enough for the seventh year when the land was not planted, and also enough for the first year of the next 7-year cycle before they were able to harvest the crops of that year. But what we do find is that they could eat out of what grew naturally during the seventh year. It just said you can't harvest it. You can't go out and take it and put it in your barns. But they could pick it, they could eat it, they just couldn't harvest it. And so what we find is that Adonai's plans for us are always good, that is, if we follow his plan. And in this system, he also provided for the poor. He knew that there were people who had no land. Adonai said, "But during the seventh year to you to let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor among your people may eat. Whatever they leave behind, the animals of the field may eat. You are to deal with your vineyard and your olive grove in the same way." So the poor could come in and pick from your vine, they could pick from your olive tree, they could pick the grain from your field. We saw last week in our parsha that Adonai introduced the principle of gleaning, that is, allowing the poor to collect grain from the unharvested corners of a field. He told the landowner, don't harvest that corner, leave it there for the poor. And we talked about Naomi and Ruth last week about going and harvesting the corners, gleaning. So what we know is that Adonai loves us all, and he provides a way for all who honor and follow him. But he still loves us, even if we don't honor him, and even if we don't follow him. His love is beyond anything that we can understand. Well, this principle of restoration also applies to the Yovel, the Jubilee of the 50th year. Then on the 10th day of the 7th month, on Yom Kippur, you are to sound a shofar blast. You are to sound the shofar all throughout your land. You are to make the 50th year holy and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It is to be a jubilee to you, when each of you is to return to his own property, and each of you is to return to his family. There were a lot of benefits included in the Yovel, the Jubilee. But the Yovel also included letting the land lie fallow, just as it did in the Shemitah. What we see here is that the promises of the Shemitah and the Yovel were physical promises, but they also have underlying spiritual principles. So just as our weekly Sabbath is a day of rest and reflection, the Sabbath of the land is supposed to be a year-long time of simpler living and reflection. Have you ever thought about that? That the Lord provided that so that you didn't really have to worry about anything. You could focus on him just like we do on Shabbat. So the sabbatical principle for living in Adonai's agricultural society is that the people are to live at a lower material standard for a year, trusting in him. The purpose of this is in order to be able to devote themselves to more spiritual pursuits, just as we do on the weekly Sabbath. So when we think about this, we read this every year and it's something that's been read for thousands of years. It has not happened. But today in the land of Israel, some who have fields and olive groves and vineyards do follow the Shemitah rules. But it's probably a small number. But they are faithful. But the question of whether or not it is possible for the whole land of Israel to follow the Shemitah is unknown. And this may be something that we are only looking at after Yeshua returns. But nevertheless, Adonai's plan was and is that Israel would understand and follow the principle of rest. It's all about rest. It is physical rest for the land, and it is spiritual rest for the individual. And there may be even more to these two events which we don't understand now, which we'll find out later. Question is, could the Jubilee be a foreshadowing of the final rest which Yeshua will bring when he establishes his kingdom on the earth? I think it's very possible that that's what it represents. The Jubilee has not been announced and observed since 121 BCE. Long, long time ago. The reason they don't is that the rabbis have determined that, at least they've said it recently, that this is the reason. They've said that the Yovel, the Jubilee, cannot be observed until all of the tribes are again living in the land. So basically, that's their understanding. But the Lord is the one who will, I believe, proclaim the Yovel.
Amen.
I think that he will determine which Yom Kippur we're talking about, when the shofar will blow, and that the shofar will be a heavenly shofar. It will announce it, and we will all understand immediately. Now here's something to think about. When the shofar blows to announce the Jubilee on Yom Kippur, this is my understanding and belief, those of us who know Yeshua will already be in his presence. We will have previously risen with him along with the righteous dead, and we will have new bodies. We will be living in eternity beyond time. But there will be some on earth at that time that hear that shofar call who are living in time, and they will, what happens to them, I don't know. But the good news is for us that we have already made that decision. We are in Messiah, and when that times we get new bodies, resurrection bodies, that are very similar to the one that he had when he rose from the dead. And after that time, we will be living not in time, but in eternity. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around that. Our second parsha, B'Chukote, begins with Adonai's promise to bless Israel, but it had an if with it. It is conditional. Something is required. I have a real long scripture here. I want to read it to you, and if you'll just listen carefully and read along with me. Adonai says, if you live by my regulations, observe my mitzvot, and obey them, then I will provide the rain you need in its season. The land will yield its produce, and the trees in the field will yield their fruit. Your threshing time will extend until the grape harvest, and your grape harvesting will extend until the time for saving seed. You will eat as much food as you want, and live securely in your land. I will give shalom in the land. You will be able to lie down to sleep, unafraid of anyone. I will rid the land of wild animals. The sword will not go through your land. You will pursue your enemies and they will fall before your sword. 5 of you will chase 100, and 100 of you will chase 10,000. Your enemies will fall before your sword. I will turn toward you, make you productive, increase your numbers, and uphold my covenant with you. You will eat all you want from last year's harvest, and throw out what remains of the old to make room for the new. I will put my tabernacle among you, and I will not reject you, but I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. I am Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, so that you would not be their slaves. I have broken the bars of your yoke, so that you may walk upright. Well, these are wonderful promises. Promises that are not a reality now, but something that we can look forward to.
Amen.
I would say that they have not become a reality now for one main reason, and that is that Israel has never lived by Adonai's regulations, observing and obeying his mitzvot, which he commanded here. In fact, just the opposite has occurred throughout the centuries. Israel has disobeyed Adonai's commands over and over. They've even been guilty of worshiping other gods. This is still true today. But even so, Adonai's promise is still in effect. He has not changed his mind. Are the Jews following Adonai's commands today? My answer is not a judgment, but a realistic look at the Jews of today, and I think you will all agree with what I'm going to say. Only a very small percentage are obedient to the terms of the Mosaic covenant. A large majority of Jews today are either very liberal or are following other religions and other gods, or are atheists. But this has not negated Adonai's promise, and he states it very clearly in today's parsha. Yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them, nor will I hate them into utter destruction and break my covenant with them. For I am Adonai, their God. Well, if we count the numbers today, we find that not many Jews still live in the land of their enemies, that is, comparatively speaking. And that is good news. There are 6.5 million in the land of Israel, about 6.5, give or take, in the United States, and then about 2 million scattered in other countries of the world. So if we look at that last 2 million, some of them remain in countries which are enemies of Israel. But Adonai's promise is still valid for them, and he will bring them back. So that's the state of Israel, the people of Israel, the Jews today. I know that all of you are aware of Iran's recent attack on Israel, and the fact that there were 20 missiles fired at the Golan Heights. The news tells us that 4 of them were intercepted by the Iron Dome, and the other 16 fell harmlessly on unpopulated territory near the Israel-Syria border. But we know that Israel responded very swiftly, and they sent fighter aircraft to destroy the launch sites and the other Iranian bases within Syria. What we see is that the enemy surrounding Israel is becoming emboldened. And our prayers for Israel and our Jewish people must intensify. This kind of activity is a sign of the times, and it lets us know that the day of the Lord is drawing nearer. We will see, I believe we will see many more things happen as prophetic events continue to unfold. But our prayer must increase. We must cry out to Adonai to protect his chosen people who are living in the land and around the world too. Now here's the other side. Even though Jews worldwide do not largely follow Adonai, there is a faithful remnant. We are a part of one part of that faithful remnant, the Messianic movement and the Messianic Jews of the world. And there are also the Christian Jews. But there are other Jews, Jews who do not yet know their Messiah, who are faithful to the way in which they know and understand Torah and prophecy. Even though they do not know their Messiah, they do serve Adonai with all their hearts and with all the knowledge which they have. They strongly believe that their Messiah will come soon. They see it on the horizon. They just don't know that he's already been here once. We've spoken about this before. You're all familiar with this. The Temple Mount Faithful Group is and has been actively working for a number of years to lay a cornerstone and build a new temple. They do this because they see that Messiah is coming soon. The Temple Institute has faithfully recreated all of the garments, furniture, knives, pots and pans, and other implements needed to carry out the operation of the temple. And there are other groups in Israel and around the world which are actively planning for life under their Messiah. Now, most of you, I think, were here last week, and you remember in our discussion of Shavuot, we spoke about Har Habayit. You remember that? Har Habayit, the mountain of the house. This was a reference to the Temple Mount, and the house that is being spoken about is the temple on it, Har Habayit. And we spoke about it in the context last week that it was the house in which Yeshua's disciples were gathered on the day of Shavuot. They were on the Temple Mount at the temple. Well, this is quite interesting. One of the groups working toward the restoration of things in Israel is called by that same name, harhabayit.org. And it means the mountain of the house.org. And for them, it is a reference to the area which is currently occupied by the Dome of the Rock and the Mosque of Omar. Their mission, among a number of other things, is to restore tefillah, to restore prayer to Har Habayit, the Temple Mount. The current situation is that Israel, the nation of Israel, has overall control of the Temple Mount, but they allow the Muslims de facto control over it. Muslim control of the Temple Mount is to the exclusion of Jews from their sacred area, and when a few of them are allowed there, prayer is not allowed. This means that the Temple Mount is desolate to those who are the rightful occupants. And that desolation is caused by the abominations which are present there. harhabayit.org wishes not only to restore the right to assemble and pray there, but also to draw the attention of Jews worldwide to the Temple Mount, making them aware that this place is the holiest place in Judaism and not the Western Wall. Tomorrow, May 13th, Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, will be celebrated. It is a celebration of the reunification of Jerusalem, which took place 51 years ago on June 7th, 1967, during the Six-Day War. We haven't reached that date yet, but they're celebrating it tomorrow. Well, tomorrow, harhabayit.org has plans to make aliyah, to go up and gather on the Temple Mount for prayer.
Wow.
And they invite all believers and followers of Adonai, both Jew and Gentile, to join them. And they're expecting thousands of people. All of those going up will undergo tevilah. You remember we talked about that last week too. That is immersion for ritual cleanness before ascending the mount. Now this is a very serious time. I really feel that we are to have a part in it here. There's real danger to those attending. And I want to ask you to please commit to pray for this event, to pray for the protection of all who are there for that purpose. We know their hearts are right. They're there for the right purpose. There will certainly be resistance by the Muslims, and there will probably be some also by the government of Israel, because they are afraid of inciting the Muslims. Well, I have put down Har Habayit's schedule converted to our time so that you can pray for these events taking place. This is no small commitment. Before you say, I'm going to do it, just wait a moment. Because of the time difference, it's going to take some real dedication to pray at these times. And I suggest that you set your alarm clock. 10:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time tonight, May 12th, is 5:15 a.m. in Israel. And there will be Shacharit prayer at the Hallel Gate. Now, you've probably never heard of the Hallel Gate. The Hallel Gate is a medieval gate in the upper western wall, which opens onto the platform of the mount. Formerly, it was called the Mughrabi Gate. But 2 years ago, it was renamed the Hallel Gate in memory of 13-year-old Hallel Yafa Ariel, who was murdered by a terrorist. The name of the gate, Hallel, is significant because those who dedicated it wanted to be a gate of Hallel, a gate of praise to Hashem, to all who enter it. (11:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 6:30 a.m. in Israel. The second Shacharit prayer minyan at the Hallel Gate. 12:30 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time is 7:30 a.m. till 11 a.m. in Israel. And this is the Aliyah, going up to Har Habayit. And this first one is with numerous rabbis and what is called the Gedolei HaTorah. The Gedolei HaTorah is the council of Torah sages, men who are important yeshiva heads, rabbinical council leaders within Orthodox Judaism. This is the highest level of spiritual leaders in Israel. And they are going up at that time to make Aliyah to the Temple Mount. And their express purpose is to go up to praise and thank Hashem. 6:30 to 7:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time is 1:30 to 2:30 in Israel. This is the second Aliyah to Har Habayit. And this will be for lesser dignitaries and for everyone else who goes that wants to go up. So this is what I am asking for you, and I want to do it myself. Please pray for these times for shalom and for protection by Adonai's mighty angels over those who will be there. Amen. Because it is certain that the enemy, Hasatan, will have his forces there as well. So I'm going to put it up one more time. These are the times that you need to pray. 10:15 p.m. tonight, 11:30 p.m., 12:30 a.m. to 4 a.m., and 6:30 to 7:30 a.m. And if you want to, you can also go to www.harhabayit.org, and you will see these events listed there. Well, this is one thing. That's tomorrow. There are other significant events coming up which must also cover in prayer, because tomorrow begins a whole series of events which will be resisted by the evil one and his minions. Now, we mentioned a moment ago that Sunday, May 13th, tomorrow, is Jerusalem Day, a day which celebrates the recapture of Jerusalem 51 years ago. Then the next day, Monday, May 14th, will be the official opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Not only that, it is the 70th anniversary of the independence of Israel. And we know that's going to draw some protests. So again, pray for the safety of all involved. The next day, Tuesday, will bring protests. On Tuesday, May 15th, Muslims celebrate what they call Nakba Day. In Arabic, this word means catastrophe, and it is their reference to the day of the independence of Israel. And they usually observe this day with protests, with anger, and many times with violence against Israel. And then sundown, Tuesday night, begins the month of Ramadan. If you're all familiar with that, that is a month-long time of Muslim fasting during the day. During this month, Muslims seek the favor of their God in granting their victory over their enemies. But they also fear the wrath of Allah if they fail to take back land that they once captured for him and then lost it. So what we have here is a combination of Israel celebrating being in the land for 70 years, land that Muslims believe is the possession of Islam, and then at the same time we're having Jerusalem officially recognized as the capital of the state of Israel by the United States. And all of this together could cause an explosive reaction. Our responsibility is to be in much prayer for everything which is happening in the land of Israel in the upcoming days. So we have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday night, and even during the month of Ramadan, I would say that we need to pray for the salvation of Muslims, because we know that the Lord loves them just as much as he loves us. They are not our enemies. It's the enemy that has directed them to where they are. And then don't forget that Shavuot begins next Saturday evening at sundown. It will begin in Israel at 7:34 p.m. That's their time. Next Saturday, that will be 1:34 our time. But it will begin for us at 8:27 p.m. next Saturday night. I was trying to think. I don't think there's anyone here today that was with us except Mary Louise and me in 2005 when a group of us from Beit Shalom were in Jerusalem on Shavuot. And as we do here, observant Jews throughout the world stayed awake the whole night, and they were doing that in Jerusalem as well. They were in synagogues, they were in yeshivas, they were studying Torah. But then before dawn, they began to make their way to the Western Wall to pray. And when we arrived there, our group, just before dawn, the Western Wall Plaza was jammed with thousands and thousands of worshipers, almost shoulder to shoulder. You almost couldn't move. And if you've looked at that, you know how large that plaza is. It was an awesome and an unforgettable sight for us. It'll be no different this year when the faithful are gathered there. And once they get there, they're going to recite together the Shemone Esrei, the Amidah, portions of which you prayed this morning, the standing prayer. And our prayer this year is, as it is every year, is that the Ruach HaKodesh will fall on the whole gathering. Fall on them just like it did on Shavuot in the year 30. And that is our prayer for us as well. That the Ruach will fall on us as we gather here in the synagogue to worship and pray on Shavuot. There are a lot of things going on in the world, and particularly in Israel. Mary Louise pointed out to me something that I think is very appropriate. Psalms 2 and 3 are very appropriate for the world situation in which we find ourselves. And I would like for us to declare them together responsively in prayer. Have I heard? Would you lead us?
Why are the nations in an uproar and the people mutter vanity?
The kings of earth set themselves up, and rulers conspire together against Adonai and against his anointed one.
Let's rip their chains apart and throw their ropes off us.
He who sits in the heaven laughs, Adonai mocks them.
So he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury.
I have set up my king upon Zion, my holy mountain.
I will declare the decree of Adonai. He said to me, "You are my son. Today I have become your father."
Ask me, and I will give the nations as your inheritance, and the far reaches of the earth as your possession.
You shall break the nations with an iron scepter. You shall dash them in pieces like a potter's jar.
So thou, O kings, be wise. Take warning, O judges of the earth.
Serve Adonai with fear and rejoice with trembling.
Kiss the Son, lest he become angry and you perish along your way, since his wrath may flare up suddenly. Happy is everyone taking refuge in him.
A Psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom.
Adonai, how many are my foes? Many are rising up against me.
Many are saying to my soul, there is no deliverance for him in God.
But you, Adonai, are a shield around me, my glory and the lifter of my head.
I cry out to Adonai with my voice, and he answers me from his holy mountain.
I lie down and sleep. I awake, for Adonai sustains me.
I will will not be afraid of 10,000s of people all around me who have taken their stand against me.
Arise, Adonai, deliver me, my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You shatter the teeth of the wicked.
Deliver.
Deliverance belongs to Adonai. Let your blessings be on your people.
Selah.
Amen.
Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be at peace. May there be shalom within your walls, quietness within your palaces. For the sake of my brothers and friends, I now say, shalom be within you. For the sake of the house of Adonai, our God, I'll seek your good. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen.
Adonai, pour out your Spirit on us. Fill us with your power, your holy zeal. Anoint us for service and empower us to be strong witnesses for Yeshua here in Beit Shalom and in our communities where you have placed us. May we not shirk from our calling, and that we would be a mighty part of your last days army. On the night of Shavuot, may your holy flames land upon our heads and anoint us for service as we cry out to you. Merciful Father, protect your people Israel and the land where you have placed your name. And may Yeshua, your Son, our Messiah, swiftly return. Jerusalem, shalom be within you. Adonai wants us all to remain alert and on our knees. We are living in a critical and prophetic time in world history as things continue to unfold between Israel and its enemies in the Middle East. Israel's intercessors must stand in the gap and fervently cry out to the Lord for her peace, for her safety, and most of all, for the salvation of all Israel.
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom. Would you stand for the Birkat HaKodesh? Adonai bless you and keep you. Adonai make his face to shine on you and show you his favor. Adonai lift up his face toward you and give you peace. Yevarekah Adonai vayishmareka. Yair Adonai panavileka vekuneika. Yisah Adonai panavileka veyasim leka. Shalom. In the name of the Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace, Yeshua our Messiah. Amen. Shabbat shalom.